Hey everybody, it's a beautiful evening here in Utah. I was just looking at the window to see if that was true, if I was about to lie to y'all. Um, it is 8:30 local time, 10:30 Eastern time. That would be why I am so tired right now this early. I am going to go to bed soon. But what I want to do is briefly look at some of the race and politics and gender and politics information. So I can maybe highlight a couple of things, a couple issues that I really find interesting and want to highlight. Maybe it tries to get at some of the broader points in these lessons, and some things I didn't get to. Hopefully makes things clear. Remember, you have the readings to do. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Let's see. I'll start with the race and politics. A couple of the really key things to remember, keep in mind with this, is that one, race is a social construction. Just like everything is kind of, gender is also social construction. Race didn't exist as a thing, as a concept, until the 1600s in the American colonies, and it was invented as a way to help separate poor white people from poor black people and native people and pretty much everybody else. The idea here was, hey, guess what? We've invented this thing. It's going to be called race. White people, you get to have a little extra social capital in the world. You're poor, you don't have anything, however, at least you're not black. It's the basic thing that they did. And we can see a lot of that still kind of plays out today. The sort of the legacy of the advantages that white people got. Again, just thinking in terms of the social benefits, not any economic benefits or anything like that, but we see at the pool party in McKinney, Texas. However, am I thinking? How were the white people treated differently than the black people at that pool party? I don't know if you saw. I finally saw a little bit of the video where the girl was being thrown around by the police officer. There's this other random white fat motherfucker, who is just standing right next to the cop as the cop is on this girl, and seems just be like a neighborhood dad or something, just sort of hanging out. Would the cop have allowed any of the other kids there to get within touching distance of him? Well, we know he wouldn't, because he pulled a gun on the kids that attempted to get within touching distance of the cop. Whereas this, I don't know, 45-year-old fatty white guy is able to use his privilege, walk up next to his cop. He's got his jorts on, sort of looks around, and then just sort of walks away. Weird. Okay. That's an example of some of the social privilege that I'm talking about that was established with the creation of race and is continued on today. There's a lot of really basic stuff about the number of black Americans we've had in Congress and in the Senate. Convict leasing and sharecropping, all right, those are two ways that slavery continued even after the ending of slavery in the 13th Amendment. Remember, we talked about how convict leasing increased sharecropping and pushed people into sharecropping. Convict leasing was if you're convicted of a crime, the state would lease you out to a private company to do work for them. It's slavery. Um, and in a way, to help protect the South's economic base and such after the end of slavery, um, a whole bunch of crimes all of a sudden became worthy of hard labor. I don't know. You know, this is a totally made up example, but you would have something. This is kind of how ridiculous some of the situations were. Jaywalking might have gone from a $5 fine to 3 months in hard labor. That would be kind of, you'd see all these like really minor crimes all of a sudden. You'd have to, work yourself almost to death, a lot of times to death, for these private companies because you walked across the street, not at the designated crosswalk. Yeah, that's weird. But sharecropping was a sort of slavery through debt. The person that owned the land, a rich white guy who had previously had slaves, but now the slaves are freed, would go back to the slaves and say, "Hey, I hear you're free, but you don't have anything. I'll loan you some stuff. You can work this land that I'll loan you. You pay me back at the end of the year, and things will be hunky-dory. You'll have some land, I'll have some money, everything will be great." Of course, it never worked out that way. The debt would always go up every year. They'd always find some way to make it so that the free people were never able to pay back all of the money, so they were perpetually in debt. So that was interesting. However, at least you got some freedom in that situation. You could decide when you went to bed at night, you weren't feeling like you were in a position where you wanted to, as what happened in these prison camps, gouge out your eyes to escape the brutality of it. So sharecropping was a preferable slavery than the convict leasing. So a lot of people would go into sharecropping, and then once you're in sharecropping, you would have a rich white guy that would back you up if the police tried to pick you up for no crime at all. You'd be like, "I'm actually owned by a rich white guy down the street, so you're gonna let me off, right?" And then the police would be like, "Okay, fine." Cool. The other thing about race being a social construction and all the stereotypes with it, sort of embedded up in it, we talked about how slaves were seen as, children, dumb, sort of tripping over themselves. They need a parent there to help them through the world. Parent happened to be the slave master, owner person. And just like kids, you would have to punish them sometimes. You'd have to control their lives terribly and whatnot. So you get justification for whippings and hard work and all that other stuff. After slavery ended, within a few years, black people went from being dumb children who need a rich white man to hold their hand through the world to these vicious, violent, savage, superhuman, brute criminals that are soulless, don't feel pain, somehow have superhuman strength and can take on 100 men, and so we need to run around and fear them. They sort of became inherently criminals. So that change, happened very, very fast. Good evidence that all this stuff is made up. We just make it up, which is a good thing, personally, editorializing here, or maybe offering some hope for the future. It's a good thing because it means we have the power to change it all. Nothing about this is inevitable, right? If we invented these racism, we can not uninvent racism or destroy it. The bad thing about it is, other than the fact that it was created in the first place, is that the way it operates is often sort of under the surface, or it's really easy for white people who don't have to recognize that race itself exists, much less racism. It's not a daily fact of white people's lives that, race exists. People treat other people differently based upon their race because white is normal. When a lot of race is hidden like that, it becomes really hard to break out of the racist cycle, which I'll get to in just one second. The one other thing I wanted to mention about this, racism, whatever, kind of an argument for what I would say would be my argument for reparations. So I'll put this for 415 years, right? That's the math, right? Yeah. Here in America, white people have been using black people as a means to transfer wealth from black people to white people, and it has been explicitly a race-based system. This isn't a class-based system. This is explicitly a race-based system. For the first 250 years, you had slavery that, allowed for white people to develop trillions upon trillions of dollars of wealth that otherwise a lot of it would have gone to black people. So that's, right off the bat, all of a sudden you have, if you sort of take white and black people and look at the amount of money each of them has, that's many trillions of dollars that were stolen from black people. And then we talked about our political history after the end of slavery. Your convict leasing, your sharecropping, which were ways that white people were able to just constantly siphon off wealth and the sort of money black people might have made from their labor into, again, white pockets. And I say white and black here because these are race-based systems, and you can't get around the fact that they're not based on anything else but race. I hope that makes sense. You have the Federal Housing Administration loans during the Great Depression, where this sort of seemingly good idea, I think it's a good idea. It would be great if we would have something like this today, where the federal government would guarantee it. We do have it today, but the idea is the federal government guarantees a certain percentage of your home loan, so that now it's affordable for middle-class people to buy a home. And middle-class people, once they buy a home, they start paying down the debt on the home, and they accumulate wealth, and they can pass the wealth on through the generations. A fine idea, great idea. It's done a lot to provide middle-class people with significant amounts of money and savings that they can fall back on and use in hard times, and it's lifted lots and lots of people out of poverty and all these great things. Except, again, this program, when implemented, was done in an explicitly race-based way. Only white people got these loans, except for the 2% of non-white people that got the loans, less than 2%. Anyway, so another situation where everybody's paying some kind of taxes, and that money, federal government money, the loans the federal government took out, the money they spent, moved from black people to white people. Any gains in the economy during this time were not shared equally, in part because all the money was already disproportionately held by white people. Once you have wealth tends to generate more wealth. heard of the term, put your money to work making more money. When you own a house and you have that wealth, usually the price of your house increases. So you're actually, without doing anything, you're gaining more and more money just from owning the home. So that, because white people have been able to own homes for so long, that's another situation where Black Americans have lost out on the ability to develop wealth of their own, been denied that specifically through government policies that have been, again, explicitly race-based. You have the interstate highway system being put down, destroying a bunch of black homes, neighborhoods, schools, businesses, eliminating the wealth gains there in the 19-teens, 1930s, 1900s, 1930s. Like 1901, like 1800s to like 1900. Large-scale white riots across the country, burning down black-owned homes and businesses wherever Black Americans started to make strides and were developing a sort of vibrant economy themselves. White people would get all pissed off because there were some black people doing better than them. Can't allow that to happen. So you go through and burn a bunch of stuff to the ground, you take out your racist anger, and you're now in a situation where black people have lost the wealth that they had managed to gain through what would be like, let's see, who's a good person to take? Mitt Romney's wet dream of personal responsibility and entrepreneurship and stick-to-itiveness. Mitt Romney has never put forth the amount of effort and stick-to-itiveness that that Black Americans had to do to make any money at all during the 1880s, 1890s, and 1900s. So instead of, well, I'll get to that in 1 second. We also have then white riots through the 50s, 60s, and 70s on the interstate highway system. Today you continue to have private development on black either owned homes and businesses or homes or apartments that are rented out predominantly by black people, and it costs money to move. It's another big wealth redistribution. You have jobs sometimes leaving the city, which hurts people that live in the city, predominantly Black Americans who were sort of segregated into the city by the move to the suburbs from white people. The one other thing I wanted to talk about, and this gets to something I was about to say, the way racism works a lot today is this covert, sort of subconscious or unconscious racism, where we see it universally among white people, and then we see some of these cases where both white people and black people demonstrate a preference for either white people or a sort of association of black people as something negative or dangerous. Example that racism doesn't, or sort of the racist soup that we live in doesn't, nobody escapes it. There's some studies that I talk about on, it ends up being in slide 45 of the Race and Politics thing. The fact that Black Americans are less likely to get hired for jobs or even to get interviewed for jobs, even if they have the exact same resume as white people. You would think it would be a flip of the coin if things were fair, but things aren't fair. If there was not racism, if you're given the exact same two applications, but one has a white name, one has a black name on it, 50-50, each time. However, that's not the world we live in. The resume, that's exactly the same, but it has Robert Eldridge at the top of it. I think, well, Eldridge is English, so I guess that works. Is going to get hired more often, so that's cool for me. The voter ID laws we talked about, or the voter ID studies, if a white person's shown an image of a black person voting and then asked, do you support voter ID laws, they'll say yes, at a 30% higher rate than if they've shown a picture of a white person voting. So it goes like 56 to 88%, I think was the percentage. The one where we see a number of times both white people and black people sort of demonstrating a preference for white people or having the negative association with black people is with this connection to negative objects and dangerous things, or negative emotions, dangerous objects, whatever. People are much quicker to associate black with, violent, gun, mean, knife, whatever. So when you're out in the world and you're sort of constantly, your brain is making these split-second calculations about, even mundane things like, where exactly do I put my foot when I step? Do I step on this crack? Am I going to, move my hand a little bit when I walk, or am I going to keep my pockets? All these things you don't really maybe think about. Extends over to not thinking about how racist you are at times. So what happens? When you make these split-second sort of calculations, black person's walking towards you, your sort of split-second calculation is gun, knife, scared, hoodie equals bad type thing. White people experience this at a much higher degree than black people, but we've also seen that black Americans tend to have a slight sort of negative reaction like that towards other black people. Very, very slight, but it's they're statistically significant, at least. So all these things work together to keep so that there's still, white advantage in society. We still have racism and reparations. That's what I was going to say. Okay, so today we can also look at, so we can look at the 50s and see, we can even identify the people today who have had their homes destroyed, who have had their lives upended through racist governmental policies. If people oftentimes think about reparations as being somehow connected to slavery, my argument would be that it's not just about slavery. Why are we stopping the clock there? Racism didn't end with the 13th Amendment. We've had this very long period of straight up stealing money from black Americans since the 1600s to today. So if we want to talk about reparations, let's take a look at the 1600s and let's also look and see what happened last year and see where we need to, maybe redress some wrongs. And again, for my 2 cents, whatever it's worth, whenever, people maybe complain about race or about reparations, saying, I'm poor and white, so I didn't, get to having all these advantages, and I didn't get to have money or something, or my parents got the crap end of the stick too, or something. my thought or response is, well, okay, yeah, that sucks for you, but it didn't happen to you based upon this centuries long of systemic, intentional, over and over again sort of racial discrimination. You were not victimized by a specifically race-based thing. We can talk about if you need to be compensated in some other way, at some other time with some other issue. But right now we're talking about reparations for the harm that America has done to black people, for the fact that today we talked about there's a 20-to-1 wealth gap between white people and black people. It's a race-based problem. It, to me, calls out for a race-based solution. Doesn't necessarily mean, there's lots of people who talk about like what reparations look like or something. It doesn't necessarily have to be like $20,000 for everybody. It's over. $20,000 would not be enough. Some of the calculations I've seen is that white people owe black people or still on about somewhere around the lines of $10 to $17 trillion over the years, over the century. So if we were to start sort of giving back the wealth, if white people start giving back the wealth that they inappropriately have, $17 trillion is a lot of money. It would be every single cent, penny, whatever that America makes in a year, every single person, every single dollar that America as a collective whole makes in a year would then just sort of go to black Americans. And that's a lot of money. But handing over a big old check maybe doesn't necessarily address some of those systemic issues either. So, I think a check is a nice way to start. But we'd also want there to be, I think, maybe force every white person in the country to undergo an anti-racism training class. Alright, I'm just sort of rambling now a little bit. I'm going to cut this thing off. I'm going to do gender in the next video. It'll be really shorter because a lot of the stuff that we talk about with gender and the way sort of sexism happens is actually really similar to racism. We see basically a lot of the same studies we see with race happen with women and sex and politics. There's a couple of really key things with women that I want to talk about, and interesting historical developments, but we'll talk about that the next time you see me.